As you can see, we have a Cisco IP phone, and it's a 7960 series, which is a phone that has 6 lines. There's also a 7940 series that has 2 lines on it. So you've got these 6 buttons, but only one of the lines are actually set up. So we've got a internal extension of 5016 on this phone. The most basic thing you're obviously going to do on a phone is make an outbound call. So one way you can do it is to hit the speaker button, like so, and you'll get dial tone. And if you're going to call an outside number, like my cell phone, which I'm going to do, first thing you got to do is hit a number like 9 to get outside dial tone. You get that secondary dial tone. Then you do your actual 10-digit number. And just like that, I'm going to get the call. And it's showing up as the caller ID of that particular phone. And here we are. Hello. So that was easy. So let's say that you wanted to call that person again. So rather than having to manually hit speaker and dial it again, you got a couple different choices. You can literally just hit redial. And that's pretty simple. I'm going to answer and hang up. Or you can go to your directory and you can go to place calls. And you can navigate this a couple ways. You can use this up and down arrow and hit select. Or you can do what the cool kids do and just hit the number 3 and it just takes you there right away. And then you can see all the different place calls you had, which of course I've only dialed these 2 numbers, and then you can just hit dial, and it just dials the number. So it's pretty straightforward. Now the directory can also be used to look at your missed calls or receive calls. So you can click either of them. We don't have any missed calls, but if you do, it's really helpful because if you come up to your phone and it says you've had 4 missed calls, well, you can just easily hit the directory button and go to missed calls and you can see exactly what they were. So now we're going to cover checking your voicemail. It's on a Cisco phone, which is the most common type of phone you'll see in a corporation. You just literally hit this button that's got the envelope in it, which is your messages button.
Hello, Cisco Unity Connection Messaging System.
So at that point, it'll take you to Unity. Cisco Unity is the voicemail platform that most corporations use. So at that point, it would have asked you for a PIN number and you would have gotten the ability to listen to your voicemail. A couple other really basic things that should be pretty easy to figure out, but I just want to cover it.
Are you there?
Is your voice is your volume. So you want to just use this up and down, and obviously whoever had this phone was a smart ass and changed the ringtone, so you can hit settings and go to ring type and select, and you can change it from whatever the current one is to something else. So I'm going to actually change it to a different ringtone. So I'm going to select the Are You There Too? And so I can pick different types of rings. I'm going to pick that one. So I'm going to exit. So you can change your volume, you can change your ringtone, things like that, super easy. The corporate directory is also an incredibly useful tool. So let's say you want to call someone but you don't remember what their actual number is. You can hit the directory button, hit number 5 for corporate directory. So let's say I want to dial Amintha, who's our trainer. So I just hit A for the first name, hit search, and I can see Amintha's listed there, so I can just hit dial. And there you go. So I can hear her phone ringing. So that's really useful for just making calls or even just transferring calls or whatnot. So we're going to actually transfer a call now. So I'm going to go ahead and call my neighbor over here, which is 5017. So I'm going to hit speaker 5017. Oh, you know what? I actually dialed the wrong number, sorry. 5017, there we go. And I'm going to answer. I'm like, hey, oh, sorry, meant to call someone else. So now I'm going to actually transfer you. So I'm going to hit the more button. More again, transfer. And I'm going to actually use the directory. And I'm going to hit number 5 for corporate. Do a Minto again, and I'm going to actually and I'm just going to hit transfer. So you can see the number is now gone from me, and now this phone is now directly calling Minto,
You've reached the Minto line.
which I got her voicemail, but that's fine. So initially I called 5017, which was actually the wrong number. And then that person transferred me to Aminta, which got 5016 to directly talk to Aminta. So it's very intuitive, it's super easy to use. So another common thing you'll see is using conferencing. So in a corporate job, a lot of times you need to do what's called an ad hoc conference. So let's say that I was on a phone call with 5017. So I'm talking, but now I realize, you know what, I really need to get Adrian on this call because he needs to have some input on this. So then I will hit more, and I'll hit conference, and I will, for now I'll just manually dial it, 612-636-7614, which is my cell phone. So I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to hit conference. So now I can actually hear all 3 phones at the same time. So I'm on my phone and all 3 of us are conferenced together. So I can drop out and these 2 are still talking. So it's pretty straightforward. So we've been using the speaker for everything. You could also use the receiver and just make a call the old-fashioned way. You could use the headset, where if you connect a headset to the back of the phone, which I suggest you do, we have some spare headsets that you can get from your trainer. You can connect a headset, and then you can just, wear it on your head and make a call that way, and you don't have to bother your neighbors by putting it on speaker. It's just a much more simple way of making a lot of calls, especially if you work at a call center, you'll always end up wearing a headset because if you're making a lot of calls, it's a pain in the butt to be using the receiver all the time, and you don't want to use speaker all the time because that's obnoxious too, so the headset's kind of the only way to go. The mute button is also something that's super important, so I'm going to go ahead and use the directory, look at my place calls, and call myself. So I'm on a call now, but let's just say that I wanted to, ask one of my neighbors a question because I didn't know the answer to the question that the customer has, and I didn't want to look like a chump, so I'm going to go ahead and hit mute, go ahead and ask the question that I need to get help from, and then unmute, and now I can just give the customer the answer they were looking for. So that's also pretty straightforward. Another thing is there's a concept called the auto attendant. So an auto attendant or an IVR, which is an interactive voice response, is simply just a menu. So I'm going to go ahead and from my cell phone, I'm going to go ahead and call the main number for Transcend. Which is, I want you to do this from your cell phone, is 651 744-0375. So I'm going to go ahead and dial that.
Thank you for calling Transcend IT. Please choose from the following options. Press 1 to reach recruiting. Press 2 to reach sales. Press
So I'm going to press 1 for recruiting.
Wait while I transfer your call.
So I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but Bob is ringing. His phone is ringing, so that was because I pressed recruiting, and Bob is our recruiter, so it went to his phone.
Sorry, Bob Ho is not
There
available.
you go.
Rec-
And then it went to his voicemail. So that was an example of a auto attendant or an IVR because I dialed a main number and then I got a menu of choices of 1 for recruiting, 2 for sales, so on and so forth. So I could have done that. Another really valuable function of a auto attendant or an IVR is the concept of dial by name directory. So I'm going to go ahead and call the main number again.
Thank you for calling Transcend IT. Please choose from the following options. Press 1 to reach recruiting. Press 2 to reach sales. Press 3 to reach our finance team. Press 4 to reach our marketing team. Press 5 to reach our fundraising team. Press 6 for our dial by name directory.
Spell the last and first name, then press pound. For Q, press 7. For Z, press 9.
All right, so
For help,
I'm
press
going to
0.
do NO, which is 6, right? If you look at that.
For
Katie Nordhagen.
add extension 65177444039. Press pound. To cancel, press star. Wait while I transfer your call.
So I press pound to dial her number, and now I can hear Katie's phone ringing, and it'll go to her voicemail. I do really like her ringtone, the saxophone.
Sorry,
Katie Nordhagen.
is not available.
So there you go. So there's a lot of really interesting things you can do if you don't really know the person's number that you're trying to reach. There's a lot of ways you can reach them anyway. You can dial the main number and get to an auto attendant, do a dial by name. If you're on the internal network, you can always use the directory like we talked about and look at the corporate directory and look up the person's name that way. So you can get pretty resourceful. There's also a concept of a direct inward dial number, or DID, and a non-DID, which sounds super complicated, but it's actually really, really simple. So this number and this number right here, 5016 and 5017, obviously I can't just dial that number from the outside world. I can't just pick up my cell phone and say, I'm going to just dial 5016 and see what happens, because that's not going to do me much good because it's not a 10-digit number. So that would be an example of a non-DID, because the only way I can dial this is either internally, or I could have called into that auto attendant and I could have done a dial by extension instead of dial by name, which that's another option too. You can dial by extension instead. So that way, let's say if you've got 100 internal employees and they all have this 4-digit extension, you don't have to give them all a DID, because you do have to pay money for DIDs. So direct inward dial numbers. So for example, like Katie and Amintha and Bob have direct inward dial numbers, so that someone from the outside world can call them directly, but other people might only have a 4-digit internal number, so that would be a non-DID. So you can still reach them, you just can't dial them directly. You have to go through an auto attendant first, and then do a dial by extension or dial by name to be able to reach them that way. One other thing we didn't really cover was the concept of a warm transfer versus a cold transfer. We did do a transfer. That was an example of a cold transfer where we called from 5016 to 5017. 5017 was like, what are you doing? You're not talking to me. Transferred you to Amintha. That was a cold transfer because there wasn't any engagement in the intermediary, right? They just transferred you. A warm transfer is just a fancy way of saying it's a conference call. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and call 5017. 5017 is going to answer, and they're going to say, oh, you know what, you actually meant to call Amintha. I'm going to go ahead and do a warm transfer. So really what that means is they're going to do a conference, and they're going to call Amintha. So I'm going to actually hit directory, do corporate directory, type A for Amintha, search, go down to Amintha, and hit dial. And she's going to actually answer because she's awesome like that. And so then I'm going to hit conference, and so now we're all conferenced in.
Hello, hello.
And then at that point, you've done your job of connecting everyone, so you're going to go ahead and drop out. But Amintha and the initial caller over in 5016 can still talk.
I am still here.
Yep, so that was an example of a warm transfer, because instead of just blindly transferring, you actually did a conference where you introduced the two parties together and you said, hey, 5016 wanted to really talk to Amintha, so here she is. And you're done. And that does it.